Hello, my name is Jordan Adams and I'm Park Ranger here at War Charcoal Ovens State Historical Park. Welcome to the park. War Charcoal was officially designated a state park in 1994. However, the history of this area goes back a long time. In 1872, a couple of prospectors discovered gold just 2 miles north of here in what became the town of Ward. In 1873, when they began mining there, they decided they needed a way to smelt the ore to get the gold out. That led us to what we're here today, trees. They decided to build the Ward charcoal ovens because they produce charcoal out of the ovens. And in order to produce charcoal, you have to have trees. And that is why they chose this area, because of the heavy forest that is around. The forest you see here today is actually a second growth forest, because they started mining in 1879 when these ovens went into operation. For 3 years, they mined and logged all the trees they could. And if you look back behind you, you'll see where it's even more barren land. That land you see was what all you saw for miles by the 1880s. There was no more trees left. They had exhausted all the resources that were. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is how these trees help to produce gold. First, I'm going to show you the two main type of trees we have here in the park. Then we'll talk a little bit about what it was like when there was no trees here. So come along with me and I'll show you a couple. Here we are. The first tree I want to talk about today, which is actually the official state tree in Nevada, is the single leaf pinyon. The single leaf pinyon has several key identifiers. And the first and most prominent probably is the single leaf of the pinyon. The single leaf pinyon has small needles that you see here today. A mature pine tree will have about 1.5 inch long needles. They're very rigid for the most part, and they're sharp pointed. The Native Americans would use these for just that, needles, for sewing, different things that they needed. The next key identifier to one of these trees is the pine cone. The pine cone is very different than a lot of other trees. As you see, they start off green and they're closed. By fall, they've opened up. And when they open up, they produce inside is a pine nut. The pine nut here, you can see one still inside the shell. The pine nut was used by a staple in the Native American diets. Without the pine nut, they probably couldn't have survived this area. Same as the wildlife. When we have good pine nuts, it gives lots of food for the wildlife. So believe it or not, a pine tree is good food for that. A pine nut today is still valuable. On a good year, it can cost up to $15 to buy a pound of pine nuts in a store. So there. The other thing with the pine tree, as I've told you before, this is a second growth forest. This pine tree is maybe 10 to 12 feet tall, roughly. Well, a mature pine can grow from anywhere from 25 to 50 feet tall. So you can really see how the pine trees that we have in the park today, for the most part, are very small compared to what a mature tree is. Okay, so now we've talked about the single leaf pinyon pine tree, the very common tree here in the Great Basin. The next I want to talk about is the tree we have over here, which is the Utah juniper tree. Come a little closer, I can show you some of the characteristics of it. The Utah juniper tree is very often called the cedar tree by locals. If you look at the needles, if you want to call them needles, they're very different color. They're very pliable. They're not sharp at all. They're more of a cluster. If you look right in here, this is what the cone of a juniper tree is. The cone is also referred to as a juniper berry. The seed to the tree is inside of here. These had lots of uses for Native Americans also. Native Americans would use these as medicines, as decorative beads, and they're also a key ingredient to gin that you would buy in the store today. As you can see, the juniper tree is a lot more of a shrub. They don't grow near as tall as a mature pine. This juniper tree is probably a little more mature than the pine tree we were at. At their height, a juniper tree only grows about 10 to 20 feet tall, where their stumps diameter can be up to 1 to 2 foot tall. So they grow way more of a bush. The Utah juniper and the pinyon pine tree are the most common trees you'll find in the Great Basin, and they're the reasons why the ovens are here today. So we talked about, remember, this is a second growth forest in Nevada. We call these forests pinyon juniper forest, PJ forest. This is a second growth. All these trees were once gone, decimated, all because of man. However, they were very important in producing gold. The ovens ran from 1876 to 1879. So in a 3-year span, they logged all the trees they could. There were 6 ovens here at War Charcoal. Each oven could hold 35 cords of wood, and it would take 7 to 10 days to burn an oven. So when you're talking 35 cords of wood per oven, over 300 cords of wood were burned every week. That decimated this forest. And if you can imagine, this forest, it's not very thick, and we imagine it wasn't very thick then. So there was no trees. It was just barren land for miles and miles and miles. If you come right here, we can show you. Here's a stump. We suspect this stump was leftovers from the original mining. So this stump is at least 120 years old. It has took over from 1876 to 1879 is when the ovens were in operation. So that's when the active logging was going on. It has took that long, here, 2016, to get the forest back from what you see today, from barren landscape with nothing but low brush and stumps wherever you could see. Okay, so the mining happened from 1876 to 1879. 3 years of total logging, total devastation. Nothing but stumps and shrubs left behind. Imagine that, just nothing but shrubs. So in 3 years, so for the next 120 plus years, it has took to slowly grow back into this forest that we see today. We're finally getting new of the Utah juniper trees growing. They're still not at the mature stage, but we're getting new ones coming every day. Remember, they grow from around 10 to 20 feet tall when they're mature. So this one's doing pretty good. You still see some young ones like this. The Utah juniper, remember, is very important for the Native Americans. The berries, or cones, however you like to refer to them, were very important in making medicines and decorative beads for the Native Americans. And then also, we're finally getting pinyon pine trees coming back. The single leaf pinyon. Here's a real young one still coming up, getting mature. They're very identifiable by the long rigid needles and the cones. The cones that come off of them, and the edible pine that was a staple in the Native American diet and in the wildlife diet. So it's took over 120 years, 130 years to get this forest back from that one time where you had basically no trees, as you can see here today, to the low-lying second growth forest that's slowly coming back today. All right, well, I want to thank you guys all for coming out here to the War Charcoal Oven State Historical Park, and I want to thank you for learning about trees today. When people think of War Charcoal Oven State Historical Park, they usually think about the ovens, they think about the gold that came out of the mines in Ward. Very seldom do people stop to think about the trees. The trees are the reason why this park exists. In 1873, when they decided to build the ovens, it was because there's trees here. Then there was no trees. Now, after 130 plus years, we're slowly getting trees back. All right, thank you guys for coming, and see you soon.